All right, assalamu alaikum. All right, so this is chapter 14, so we're going to be doing the first part today. All right, so this is about invertebrates. All right, so we're going to go over like the first basically like 2 pages of invertebrates. All right, so it says here, first of all, invertebrates lack backbones and include all animals except fishes, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and birds, which are vertebrates. Right. So invertebrates are all the animals that don't have like a backbone, like a kind of like a spine. Right. So there are many familiar invertebrate groups such as sponges, jellyfish, corals, worms, clams, snails, octopuses, and squids, and so on. Right. So all these things are invertebrates, right? So these are some examples of some of the creatures that are here. You see these sponges, right? Sponges are actually kind of animal, right? So they're like artificial sponges, and there's real sponges, right? Sea anemones, earthworms, all these different kinds of things. Insects, right? Lobsters, sea urchins, right? These are different kinds of, invertebrates, right? If we go to the next one, you see some more examples. This one is specifically showing just like marine invertebrates, right? Again, marine meaning like in the ocean, right? So you see jellyfish, octopus, sponge, sea anemones, corals, right? In the coral reef, all these different kinds of things are all invertebrates. They're all animals, but they do not have a backbone, right? All right. So most marine invertebrates have planktonic larval forms that are dispersed by ocean currents. All right. So basically, what it's saying is that if you go back here, right? So most, do you notice like we were talking about how animals they transform over their life, right? So this is the adult ladybug, right? But when it was born, it didn't look like that at all. When it was born from an egg, it had some other kind of like juvenile form. Right? It had some other kinds of like young kind of form, some kind of larva, and so that eventually had to change into the adult form, right? So if we look at marine invertebrates, a lot of them, you see this one at the top, planktonic larva, a lot of them, they do not look like the adult form down here, right? We recognize the adult form like the starfish, some kind of insect, a lobster, different kinds of things like that. So most of these invertebrates, when they're born, they do not look like that. They have some kind of small larval kind of form. Now this also says planktonic. Planktonic means that it itself doesn't really like swim in the ocean and decide to go here or there. Wherever the ocean takes it, it just goes with it. And so the ocean is filled with currents that are always moving and moving. So when it's in its small form, it's easy for it to just drift all over the place. When it's an adult, right, it's much more difficult for it to move. So that's what it's telling us here. A tropical starfish need not crawl from Cuba to Florida's tropical waters through the depths of the Straits of Florida. So this is going to be very difficult for an adult to just kind of like go all through the ocean. But when it's in its juvenile form, it could just float along with the ocean. Such migration would be impossible for an adult, but the larval form can make the trip passively. So if we take a look at the next one, right, this is the example that they're giving. So this is Florida over here, right? So we live like over here somewhere. And this is Key West over here. And then this is the Straits of Florida. So there's a current that goes through it called the Florida current that kind of moves water up this way. So from here, the water moves slowly over here, right? So you see the arrows, it's showing you the direction of the water flow, right? So all these arrows are showing you the direction of the water flow. And so over here is Cuba down here, right? So if you have a starfish down here, it's not going to like crawl through all the way over here to Florida. That's going to be difficult. It could do that maybe, but not necessarily. But when it's in its planktonic form, and let's suppose it catches the current, well, the current can easily take it with it, and maybe it goes all the way up here and lands over here on the coast of Florida. So when it's in its small baby form, it can easily go anywhere in the ocean. Right? In fact, this type of dispersal, right, where the baby just goes with the currents, accounts for the prevalence of tropical marine invertebrates in the waters surrounding southern Florida, including the famous reef-building corals. So the coral reef and all those things, they arrive here when they're very small, when they're babies, right? It's not like adult invertebrates are coming here to Florida. It's that when they're small, they can go all over the place. All right. So At the same time, larval dispersal greatly complicates studies of the effects of overfishing on invertebrates, such as the highly valued Florida stone crab and Caribbean spiny lobster. So if we go over here, right, these are the two animals that they're talking about, the crab and the lobster. So let's suppose people are fishing a lot of these lobsters out of the ocean, right? A lot of these lobsters are taken out. So what's going to happen is that, for most animals, you would kind of notice that, the population is going down in this area. So maybe there's too much fishing going on of this lobster. But what happens is that this lobster, right, even though the adults are taken, the planktonic larval form can still show up because the ocean is bringing it to this area. And so then those deposit here, and then they grow into an adult. So you're not able to notice that maybe you're fishing too much. All right. So studies have shown that the spiny lobster population of Florida's southeast coast is established by larvae that arrive from various local as well as distant Caribbean sources via the Florida current. It is also interesting that in 1993, when huge floods occurred in the Mississippi River, larval transport was greatly affected in the Gulf of Mexico, and was apparently the cause of abundant slipper, lobster, and sand crab larvae from the northern Gulf of Mexico arriving in the Florida Keys. All right? So the important generalization is that varying conditions can make large differences in the marine invertebrate larval recruitment that establishes adult population. So they're saying that there's, the marine invertebrate larva, right? The reason they go this way and that way is because of the ocean current. So if any of the ocean currents change a little bit, then you're going to see changes in the adult populations of that invertebrate in that area. All right. So not all southern Florida marine invertebrates are strictly tropical. Right? So not all of these are tropical. Right? So a lot of these invertebrates are tropical, these different kinds of lobsters or crabs, but there's a lot of kinds of invertebrates that are not necessarily restricted to the tropical area. They can live up north in the colder water as well. Right? So it says some are dependent on estuaries for part of their life cycle. Right? So they're giving you examples of different kinds of creatures that can live in the estuaries. Right? Okay, so by the way, so this one right here, you see this lobster we were talking about? So these two right here are the early larval planktonic form of this larva. So you can see this is basically microscopic. All right? So when they're this tiny, the current can just carry them quickly. All right? Now this right over here is an example of the Florida current, right? We were talking about the Florida current. So let's suppose something is in Cuba and it's floating around over here. The Florida current can quickly pick it up and move it over here, and maybe it deposits it right over here, and so it starts to grow and live here in Florida. Right? So this Florida current is basically like, the ocean water moving slowly over time. Right? And this over here is showing you, water that's moving from the Everglades into the ocean. So what's important here is that basically right on the edge of the land, you see the edge of the land right over here, where the fresh water coming in and the salt water mix. These areas are all estuary areas. Right? Remember, estuaries are basically where the fresh water and the salt water kind of mix. So the amount of salt for them is kind of like in the middle. It's kind of in between. All right? So they're giving you an example of some of these organisms that live in the estuaries. So you have the blue crab, pink shrimp, and eastern oyster. Right? So the blue crab is this organism right here. You can kind of tell it looks like blue and it has like red claws at the end, right? So this is the blue crab right over here. So the blue crab is found from Cape Cod, which is all the way up in Massachusetts, southward around Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico. So this crab is not necessarily just like a tropical species. It can live in many, many different places, whether it's colder up north or down here where it's warm. So saying that as adults, blue crabs use estuaries, where they are aggressive predators on other invertebrates and fish. All right? So the blue crabs, they basically, can go over here into these estuaries, and they go and they eat a lot of these small kind of creatures that live there. All right? But what happens is that they also become prey for things like the turtle. So this is called the Kemp's Ridley turtle, right? Kemp's Ridley turtle, and the American crocodile. They both eat this kind of crab, right? So this turtle can eat this kind of crab. All right. So it's telling us that the blue crab is considered a possible indicator for restoration of the Caloosahatchee estuary. All right. So what does that mean? Right. This is saying that this is an indicator. So indicator means something that tells you something, right? So basically, there's different kinds of species that are called indicator species. So let's take a look at some examples. Right. So this right over here is telling you the amount of pollution. Right. You have low pollution, right? Low, some pollution, medium pollution, high pollution, and extreme pollution. So basically, this is telling you what kind of creatures are killed off at each stage. So let's suppose we take this freshwater shrimp, right? So let's suppose there's low pollution. Well, the shrimp can still live there. If there's low pollution here, still can live there. When there's slight pollution, right, then it's still living, but it starts to disappear, it starts to go down. And then when it gets to medium pollution, this one is gone. So what does that mean? It means that, let's suppose we find freshwater shrimp in an area. What does that mean? It means the pollution is either going to be slight or low, right? It's going to be slight or low, right? It's not going to be medium or high, because if it was medium or high, this shrimp would be gone. Does that make sense? So that's the kind of thing that so these are called indicator species. These are species that scientists follow, and then if they see that, oh, this one is present or not present, it can tell you how much pollution is in that area. So the blue crab is an important indicator, and it tells us something about these estuaries. All right. So now we have, right, now this is a mangrove over here. All right. So now we're talking about the pink shrimp, right? So the pink shrimp, right, are important in Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay, all right? So Florida Bay is this whole area down here. See Florida Bay? It's all these lots and lots of tiny, tiny islands all in here, and a lot of fresh water coming in here. So the pink shrimp, it lives in that area, right? The mangrove swamps, right, which are also near Florida Bay, the mangrove swamps are extremely important nursery grounds for the huge numbers of pink shrimp harvested near the dry tortugas. So you see these mangrove swamps, it's saying that this is an important nursery for the shrimp. So what is a nursery, right? A nursery is where the juvenile baby forms of something are grown, right? Like you have an ant nursery, or in the hospital you have a nursery, right? So this mangrove, with all these roots, right, it provides protection for small animals, especially when the creature is very small. So the pink shrimp, when it's still very small, it lives here and seeks protection in all these small roots and stuff over here, right? So when it's grown, then it goes off into the ocean, right? So this is a type of mangrove tree. Whenever you see these kind of like roots like this, these are all mangrove trees, and there's different kinds of mangrove trees. So what they're saying is that these shrimp, all over here in these estuaries, they live as juveniles when they're small. Juvenile means small. Then when they're adults, they go all over into the ocean, and they're saying that here in the dry tortugas, that people can go there to catch a lot of shrimp. Now let's take a look at the eastern oyster. Right, so we have this oyster here. This is an eastern oyster. So the eastern oyster occurs in inshore coastal waters from the Gulf of Mexico to Cape Cod. So again, this one all the way from Cape Cod in the north where it's cold, all the way to down here it's warm. So this is not just a tropical species. So it thrives in shallows, like shallow water, not too deep, having estuarine salinities, right? Optimally in the range of 10 to 20 parts per trillion. So what does that mean? All right, so remember estuarine. Estuaries are where the fresh water and salt water mix. So the amount of salt in them is going to be kind of halfway in the middle, right? So let's take a look at this picture. Over here on the left, 0 to 2 parts per trillion. That means that there's almost no salt here, right? The amount is 0 to 2. So this must be the fresh water coming in. 20 to 30, this must be the salt water. This must be the ocean. So in the middle, this is the estuary, right? The amount of salt is like in between. It's not 0, it's not 20 to 30. It's like in between. So a lot of these oysters, they live in this, in this estuarine area. It said particularly 10 parts per trillion. So 10 is like right here, right in the middle. Okay. So not too salty, not too freshwater. So basically, what these oysters do, right? In addition to having an important ecological role, oysters support large fisheries. Right? So basically, oysters are important for keeping the water clean so that fish can live there. So say in Florida, the Apalachicola River estuary, which is up north somewhere, is famed for oyster production. Oysters strain water through a fine network in their gills, trapping minute or very small particles including bacteria, plankton, and detritus. So they're saying that oysters strain water. So what does that mean? It means that water goes through. So oysters are what are called filter feeders. So they pump water through their digestive system, and the digestive system takes out any particles. And so what's left is cleaner water. Right? So the water comes in, gets cleaned, and the oyster takes all that food to eat. And so what's left and pumped out is clean water. So this is what oysters do. So this is very important. So take a look at this picture here. So they took some water and they put it into two different containers. So on the left, there's no oysters. On the right, they did put oysters. So the water was the same originally. But after several hours, probably several hours or a day or something like that, take a look at the water. You see all these oysters? They cleaned all the water. So the water looked like this originally on the left, all dirty and filled with all kinds of particles. Okay, now you put the oysters in them, and all of a sudden, look how much they cleaned all the water out. All right. So the eastern oyster also does this. This is very important to help to keep the water clean. So it helps if it's clean, then other kind of species can also live in there as well. Right. So oysters strain water through a fine network in their gills. In polluted waters harboring human pathogens, oysters can be dangerous to eat, or may themselves be killed by other pathogens and or excessive sediment loads. So, let's suppose there's like too much pollution. Well, then even oysters themselves, they can't handle it, right? So saying in a good health, a single oyster can filter 50 gallons of water per day. So every day, one oyster can filter 50 gallons of water, right? All right, so let's keep going. An enigma, which is like a interesting question, or something that like a puzzle that you can't figure out, is the genus Macrobrachium. So they're saying that they don't know a lot about this invertebrate. So this one right over here, these kinds of creatures, they're saying that they don't know a lot about this kind of creature. They're saying this genus contains several edible species of upper estuarine and freshwater river shrimp. So freshwater means what? Like no salt. Upper estuarine, right, basically means like very close to freshwater. So it's in the estuary, so it's mixed. So it's halfway between. But still it's closer to freshwater than to the ocean water. All right, so upper estuarine is still like pretty much close to freshwater. So there's a lot of these river shrimp found around the world. And there's 4 species in Florida, 2 of them found in the Miami River, and a few other South Florida locations. So only about 4 of these species are here in Florida. All right. So they're also present in other places in Central America and elsewhere, and stuff like that. So it's not giving us much more information here. But basically, they're saying that this one, Macrobrachium, are river big river shrimp like this. So the names are up here. All right. So see this table. So these ones, cinnamon and big claw river shrimp, right? See this Macrobrachium. You see where it says M period? They just abbreviated. M stands for Macrobrachium, right? So these kinds of river shrimps, all right, this is little is known about them, all right? Now, so we talked about all of the, I think we talked about all of these kinds of shrimp and lobsters. So this is just basically giving you the same kind of information up here. So make sure that you look through and read through this as well.